Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with G.I. Joe vs. Transformers 4 Black Horizon. After merging with the Matrix, Colonel Hawk has quit the Joes to work covertly with the Autobots, and this has led him, Flint, and Optimus Prime to the secret city of Cobra-La. Their denizens long ago made a pact with Unicron to wipe out humanity, and they've activated a signal that's bringing him on his way. When cornered by enemy forces, our three heroes encounter a prisoner, long thought dead, offering to help them. G.I. Joe Colton.
The cover features an ethereal Galapulus watching Bludgeon and some Pretenders trek across a snowy field, along with some Cobra-La airships in the background. It's a nice, effective look, though my biggest criticism is that the Pretenders look more like monsters from One Punch Man. Not bad designs, they're interesting enough. I can't tell that they're supposed to be Decepticons just with organic tech integrated into them. Though I'll admit part of that has to do with my lack of familiarity with the Pretenders in general. The alternate cover is basically your classic good-evil parallel. What was going on with the bad guys, more or less what's happening with the good guys. I'll admit I prefer this one, if only because it's always nice to see Optimus Prime posed for battle.
I mean, these crossover stories do seem to get by a lot on nostalgia, so in that regard, I would say that cover B is the most effective.
After the standard recap page, we go to the Himalayas, where Cosmos and Firewall are searching for their comrades. The beacon signal is so strong it's blocking any hails, so Firewall suggests looking for trouble, because that's where a member of G.I. Joe is going to be.
You know, fighting for freedom and all. Honestly, I think the comic deserves a couple of points for being one of the most subtle references to the old cartoon, and not as obvious as saying something is more than meets the eye twice in the same story. You know what you did.
The hacker is suddenly pulled beneath the snow, with the Autobot thinking that maybe a prank was pulled while his back was turned, only for him to get caught in an avalanche. It's gotta be one elaborate prank. Firewall gets her bearings in the caverns and finds who grabbed her. A very grisly-looking Yeti.
Who thought it was a good idea to get Zack Snyder to direct the sequel to Smallfoot?
Having learned of Joe Colton's escape, Galapulus takes his anger out on Pythona. It was her insistence on having someone to torment, and her pleas that he's an old man don't really have an effect. I can't say whether or not it has anything to do with the fact that Colton doesn't look like he's aged a day, but it certainly doesn't help her case. So the Cobra-La head honcho orders the release of Nemesis Enforcer. A group of Joes are waiting for the orders to move out, and... wait, is that Silver Samurai? I know Marvel published Joe comics for a while, but this feels like a lawsuit waiting to happen. Anyway, Duke and Lady J are speaking with Colonel Flag, hoping to get permission to enter Tibet, which is kind of tricky. They mention that a mysterious object in space is seemingly drawn to a signal coming from that area, capable of an extinction-level event. And one of their own, Flint, may be held against his will in the area. All this gains them the authorization they need, and later Lady J privately admits to Duke that telling a white lie could be something she picked up from Flint.
But isn't the idea of getting something from him the very reason you denied his earlier flirtations? And by getting something from him, I mean an STD.
In the Cobra-La tunnels, Flint's been fully wrapped up in the Nickelodeon gack he was shot with in the face earlier, carried by Prime, and worried about how this will affect his reputation.
Hey, some of us would kill to be baby carried by a giant robot with Peter Cullen's voice. Show some respect!
Hawk is still marveling about how Joe Colton is still alive, since his reported death shut down the adventure team. That story will have to wait until after they've escaped Bludgeon. Then, when asked, quickly explains that he and some other Decepticons arrived on Earth to take it over, only to be shot down by the Chinese government and take refuge in Cobra-La after making a deal with its leader. I guess there's time for some exposition. They arrive at a rock bridge that they can cross, then destroy to cut off pursuit, only for Bludgeon and the Cobra-La minions to drop from above. The skull-faced samurai bot is impressed that someone knows the caverns so well, and thinks his sadistic jailer didn't keep a good eye on him over the past 25 years.
It actually is kind of weird, considering the big deal she made about having something to torment and all. I mean, it was probably out of the whole evil likes to be evil thing, but still, it seems like Pythona left him alone pretty often. I joked about it in part 1, but I guess she really was not responsible enough for a pet.
Hawk starts cutting Flint free while Colton takes on the soldiers. After taking a barrage of fireballs, Prime, on some kind of hunch I suppose, rips open Bludgy's chest to reveal a smaller Decepticon inside. The more intimidating exterior, more or less Cobra-La tech. The killer seems pretty okay with it, since now Prime will see his true face when his spark is ripped away. Didn't seem to be particularly important in their previous bouts, but hey, it sounds all intimidating or something. He's getting angry, making his fighting sloppier, causing him to fall over a ledge. Prime grabs him, since a fall from that height could surely kill him, and the Autobot is always about the sanctity of life. Bludgeon, on the other hand, leans more towards death and destruction, so to keep his foe from winning, secretes his metal-eating acid, burning Optimus's hand. Kinda looks burned off in this angle, but later we see that's not the case, preferring to fall to his own demise.
Yes, it's just so devious. He'll have one less enemy to fight, but he may feel bad about a psycho choosing to do away with himself. That'll show him while he's saving the planet.
Flint is finally freed, and he suggests they help the crazy old coot, who approaches with a Cobra-La sword, indicating victory in his fight against the 3 or 4 soldiers, because awkwardness is funny. With likely more goons on the way, Colton says they have to keep moving ahead, adding that he chose to stay in prison to keep an eye on Cobra-La, sneaking out to map the tunnels and memorize their lair as often as he could, knowing they were up to something. Comes in handy when some young punk gets lost and needs a crazy old coot to get him out. Gee, you think that young punk crack was for me? Yes. I don't think he likes you.
I kind of find it funny the way Optimus doesn't sugarcoat it, which makes sense since I don't think giant space robots have a lot of use for sugar. Come to think of it, what would happen if you put sugar in a Transformer's gas tank?
Also, note the weird little typo of the word punk being repeated. Anyway, Prime blasts the bridge behind them, Joe suggesting he may know a way to stop Unicron. Elsewhere, Pythona approaches an egg, dropping some of her blood into a port of some kind, turning the desiccated-looking body within into a more youthful and stronger form. Nemesis Enforcer bursts from captivity, and since it was her blood that woke him up, he's Pythona's to command, and she wants him to destroy someone.
But I'm not going to tell you who it is until it's dramatically convenient.
Unicron is now so close to Earth his approach is visible to the naked eye. News reports that scientists are scrambling to find a way to deflect it, and that it seems capable of interfering with transmissions, which Unicron does to prevent any interference with his plan. We cut to...
Those devious villains! They've captured Princess Jasmine! Someone call Aladdin and Genie! Maybe Abu.
Actually, that's Firewall shackled to the wall and put in a skimpy outfit. G.I. Joe is certainly picking them young these days. What are you supposed to be, anyway? The G.I. Joe High School Cheer Squad?
She'd look a lot less like a cheerleader if you didn't change her clothes for some creepy reason. That's on you. And I get the feeling you would have dressed up any of the other female Joes the same way, like Lady J. Lady J in a cheerleader outfit. What were we talking about again?
Dr. Mindbender waltzes in, does that obligatory villain gently touches the girl's face cliché, and explains that, while advanced, the people of Cobra-La value tradition and ceremony, such as sacrificing Firewall to Unicron. So I guess that's why she's dressed up like that?
Aren't they technically sacrificing all humanity to Unicron? I'm not sure what makes the hackers so special, unless they have similar outfits for the other 8 billion people or so.
Making their way through a passage too narrow for Prime, Flint is baffled that Colton chose to stay in prison for a quarter-century. Joe felt it was his duty as a soldier to finish his mission. Yeah, but didn't you miss the world? You know, your family, friends, women, sports, women, movies, women?
Hula girls! Hula girls! Hula girls!
Okay, I'll admit, that was funny, but I'm still scratching my head over this rendition of Flint. If Tim Seeley's just doing his own thing, okay. I think it makes the character a lot less likable than I remember from the cartoon, and it can get a little obnoxious, but at least that'd be an explanation. But getting to know many of these characters as people has been a consistent hurdle with these crossovers, so I have previously guessed they're banking on nostalgia to fill in those characterization gaps.
Honestly, if they really wanted a hound dog character that talks like a wannabe ladies' man, classically speaking, I think Shipwreck would fit that bill better than any other Joe from the old cartoon.
Colton points out that if he had not been spying on his captors this whole time, there wouldn't be a world to return to. And if the rest of the planet yaps the way Flint does, he might stay in Cobra-La. Hard to blame the guy, honestly. Anyway, he's led him to the farm for the metal-eating spores, mentioned in the cave paintings in Part 1. The Yeti cultivated them, and may be insurance for Globulus in case the pact with the Chaos Bringer doesn't go as planned. That's when they're discovered and advanced upon by several Yeti, apparently the result of Cobra-La experimentation, and have their own language that Joe has learned to translate. Okay, fine. Before their skulls can be made into soup bowls, which seems wildly impractical, and it should probably be kills here instead of killed, Joe uppercuts one of the abominable snowmen while yelling, "Kung Fu Grip!"
You know, it makes sense to reference that phrase since it was part of the marketing of the original G.I. Joe figure. A little Googling reveals that the term Kung Fu, originally speaking, refers to a skill achieved through hard work and practice, not specifically martial arts. But a punch is not a grip. So while punching out a Yeti's tooth looks cool, yelling that phrase kind of undercuts it with an unnecessary dash of stupid.
Cosmos drops in with some suppressive fire, which I guess is so scary most of the Yeti don't show up in any of these panels. Joe warns the flying saucer to keep away from the spores, then asks who Firewall is that he's been ranting about. Flint says that she's Hawk's communications and tech officer, so he begins to interrogate one of the hairy stragglers, while the Pretenders spot G.I. Joe forces heading towards Cobra-La. It's kind of awkward when one of them says they were ordered by Globulus to take care of them, but not how. Feels like a clunky segue so they can talk about how they took on the Autobots in the Ark 2 and allude to have killed them. They decided on a plan, one that involves them leaving their bioshells, and soon enough they face the Joes in their combined form.
Come meet dolls. Die for Monstructor!
Okay. I am dying from a congenital condition common in my species.
Is he buying it?
And they're not meat dolls, they're meat action figures. Meat action figures! Anyway, Cosmos is loaded up with the metal-eating spores, with Flint going along to make sure they don't rupture.
I guess if I'm going to die, being digested by fungus is at least original, yes?
Cosmos, you're weird.
And you're a jerk. I know he says to save the dying by fungus for the planet barreling down on them, but calling him weird for his very legitimate concern of towing something that can kill him from the inside is just baffling in its lack of sensitivity. Did someone in this book just hate Flint from the old cartoon for some reason?
Colton tells the young punk not to showboat or anything, and it gets immediately brushed off as they ascend to their mission. That leaves Joe, Hawk, and Optimus to find Firewall. And from the sky, we can see that Nemesis Enforcer has spotted them. Kaz and Flint leave Earth's orbit and see Unicron. I think he's moving.
Not moving, transforming.
Well, that technically means parts of him are moving, doesn't it? We finally see the Chaos Bringer in his robot form, bellowing the same message as before about his return. Flint admits he's scared, but repeats Colton's words of wisdom about how they're soldiers and they need to see their mission through, as they fly right into Unicron's mouth.
Sadly, they were not prepared for Unicron's morning breath.
Globulus is delivering a speech to the populace of Cobra-La, with Firewall restrained for all to see. He bellows how the time of human dominion of the planet is over, with them seizing control once Unicron comes by and gobbles humanity like a bowl of Pringles. That's when Colton and Hawk start barreling through in Optimus's truck form, and it's kind of funny, especially with the bot telling them to move aside. Not sure what to make of Unicron in the background. Are they supposed to be outside? Because I figured they were underground. Or is this supposed to be some kind of ceremonial projection? Anyway, the soldiers hop out while Prime faces the guards, in a scene not unlike the cover to Issue 1. He's nice enough to suggest that they flee, just as a giant bug thing jumps on him. Aw, Mr. Tickles wants a hug. His human allies are making their way through the goons when Colton starts getting nostalgic. This reminds me of the old days. Adventure Team Commander and Adventurer on the case.
Now that I think of it, our names weren't really all that creative. Pretty sure our marketing guy was getting suggestions from his 4-year-old.
He gets scooped up by Nemesis Enforcer, but the old soldier insists Hawk save Firewall. Apparently familiar with the Flying Menace, which shouldn't be too surprising at this point, he cuts off one of his wings, forcing the flight to the ground. And later, I imagine that wing would be deep-fried, covered in barbecue sauce, and fed to the Eddies. While Flint and Cosmos are searching for the best spot to drop the metal-eating spores, and encounter some enslaved aliens to boot, Unicron's very presence is causing unusual weather patterns across the globe, and it won't be long before quakes and tsunamis follow. But he's probably not just going to stand around that long. In Tibet, Colton's fight does not go well. As he's thrown around, Pythona reminds him of the story she told him. In particular, once the winged creature targets you, the only escape is death. Then Joe tries to reason with her, saying he knows she's not some mindless slave like the one he's fighting, or like Globulus, that she knows purging humanity is wrong, and that she saved him and Chokpa from certain death. She's capable of compassion, and we get this shot of her face expressing regret and sorrow, just before he's repeatedly pummeled, and Pythona says, very softly, that he's wrong.
If he defeats the Enforcer, pulls out a diamond ring, and gets on one knee for the Snake Lady, I am out of here.
Optimus, meanwhile, has been pinned by the slug caterpillar thing. Slugapillar? Anyway, the teensier soldiers are advancing, and one is holding his sword up, readying a swing, but taking just long enough to suggest the Autobot should have brought more robots with him, which I suppose gives the Semi that heroic motivation to break free and smack them all with a huge creature.
I am Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots, and it is my job to be more than enough for the likes of you.
Don't get beaten by cannon fodder, protect all life, give stirring inspirational monologues. The job description pretty much goes on from there.
Hawk interrupts Globulus from trying to murder Firewall, and as they grapple, the villain insists humanity's destiny of doom was decided long ago. Hawk counters with his recent experience with seeing different paths, different versions of the future, declaring that while he previously feared it, he knows that destiny is not set in stone. Now imagine how epic this moment would be if we saw any actual progression in this alleged arc of his, or any signs that he saw some vision of the future other than the cataclysmic one he said he kept seeing on repeat. Outside, Monstructor is handling the Joes fairly easily, apparently having an absorption field around him that, on top of various energies, can, I guess, absorb life force itself, as a pilot shrivels up before crashing his chopper. As he cackles with evil delight, Monstructor's head is targeted by 3 lasers, and then it explodes, reducing him to his component robots, all thanks to the Laser Squad. So I guess he can't absorb lasers? And even though those lasers were targeting 3 different points on his head, I guess the 3 squad mates here just rushed to get into a group shot only the audience would see? Whatever. Pythona is calling time out for her growling minion, admitting she doesn't like seeing Colton injured and bleeding, though she contends this isn't compassion, rather respect. All the years she tried to break his spirit, he continued to fight and to hope. Just before the Berserker can make the final stabbity stab with his gauntlets, Pythona runs him through instead, because with Nemesis Enforcer, the only escape is death.
Well, looks like she found a loophole to the rule by putting a hole in him. Though I was kind of surprised the Enforcer attacked Joe at all. I expected Pythona to have ordered him to go after Globulus so she could seize power, or because she secretly fell in love with her prisoner.
And that would be downright nutty.
Unicron is gradually reaching for the Earth. Almost there. Almost there. As buildings, vehicles, and other items start getting pulled towards him. Cosmos detects that feeding has commenced while carrying some hangers-on, and soon they arrive at Uni's giant brain. Giant, very human-looking brain, oddly enough. Unfortunately, Kaz is hit with some kind of magnetic pulse weapon, and it makes for a bumpy landing. He tells Flint that for now, he's paralyzed. It's up to me now, isn't it?
We're doomed!
Apparently, with all the spores in one convenient bag, he exits Cosmos, seeing some of the aliens that had clung to the outside. I'm here to save the world. Which one of you scumbags wants to try and stop me?
Hey, remember when you were explicitly told how Unicron operates, which included enslaving the inhabitants of the worlds he consumes? Did you forget that, or are you just more concerned with cool action movie one-liners?
Hawk frees Firewall, and in gratitude, she says that she hearts him right now, but it's kinda gross because he's totally old. Yeah, that felt like necessary dialogue. That sounds like something a real human would say. Galopulus intervenes, ensnaring Hawk and choking his would-be sacrifice. Of course, we can't have a wipe out humanity story without mentioning the pollution and wars that have threatened the planet.
This is not an unfair accusation. Sadly, even in real life, there are people who will romanticize combat or military service to the point that they are willingly blind to any kind of error made. Some in power try to keep their power by starting international conflicts regardless of the human cost. And there are those that see too much work and not enough profit in cutting back or eliminating practices that harm the environment. Yet, here we have a supposedly advanced race that was watching humanity from the shadows, and not once did they consider they could curb these destructive elements with the kind of influence they allegedly have.
Worse than that, apparently, is their friendship with the Transformers, whose very existence is offensive, though Bludgeon was useful when he adjusted. Then Optimus punches him to the ground, and it feels quite satisfying. G.I. Joe busts in, Mindbender gets knocked out, and Duke apparently recognizes Colton on sight alone. Guess it makes sense for a ranking officer to know the origin of the group's name. You're him! G.I. Joe! No, son. You're G.I. Joe now. I'm just an old soldier. Care to hand me a piece?
Well, all those years in captivity, he was too focused on his mission to really think about all the friends and family, companionship, and just joys of life he's been missing out on. But he sure has missed being able to kill his enemies from a distance.
Within the Chaos Bringer, Flint is approached by a clawed alien, through whom Unicron speaks. He does the standard belittling of his efforts and how he's older than the universe, yada yada yada, and decides to let the alien he's controlling eat the Joe, which, conveniently, is just set up for Flint to throw the alien off the edge with the bag of spores, and say, "I hope you don't mind a side of mushrooms," then shoot the bag, spread the spores, because a shotgun blast can cause the bag to explode somehow. I guess they're supposed to be very volatile spores.
Old Dashel here should change his name to Flippant, since he doesn't seem to have any sympathy or regard for creatures that have mind control nodules on their frickin' heads.
Those cave paintings were translated for him, so he knows they're slaves, he knows Unicron is the big bad, and I get that the entire planet is at stake. But these quippy movie lines seem out of place and completely disregard that these aliens, even if they're ugly, are victims of the Chaos Bringer too. It's this kind of apathy done for laughs that made the Autobots absolutely not heroic in the Age of Extinction movie, when they shoot caged aliens because they got startled.
And yes, I went to IMDb to see if Tim Seeley had any writing credits on the movie, and he doesn't. But the fact that I had to check at all should really say something.
Cosmos successfully reboots, just in time for them to escape, as the spore begins eating through Unicron's brain. Flint starts with more snarky comments, which are funny, I'll admit, but are also appropriately aimed at the right alien.
Flint?
Yeah.
You're weird.
Actually, Cosmos, the term you're looking for is sociopath. Can you say sociopath, kids? I knew you could.
Fighting on the ground, or in this case under it, seems to have come to a close as well, as Cobra-La soldiers, including Pythona, are taken away. Duke assures they'll be tried for crimes against humanity and never cause trouble ever again. Though, after years of being a prisoner, Colton wonders just how he'll adjust to a world he's been disconnected from for so long. Flint's back! Yay. And Lady J starts kissing him the second he exits Cosmos.
No. No. He's been a brazen, egotistical jerk this whole story. I don't care that he helped save the world. He brushed her off, interrupted her, was pretty condescending. We have no idea if they actually had any kind of relationship beyond that, but because they were a thing in the original cartoon, of course she falls for him. No, he does not get to make out with the hottest member of the team. If Colton and Pythona had ended up falling in love, that would have made more sense than this. You deserve better.
Anyway, Hawk and Joe congratulate him on his successful mission. He makes a crack about just wanting to earn his manly points back. And we jump ahead a day where Skid's Prowl and Sideswipe are being repaired at G.I. Joe headquarters. Guess they survived and will make a full recovery. Kinda weird. I don't know why the Pretenders wouldn't have killed them. They certainly talked like they did. And it's not like they'd have shied away from killing characters in this continuity, but hey, somewhat happy ending. Firewall's glad they'll make it, and invites Prime to join her and Eject watching some bad TV, get their minds off recent events. Surprisingly, Prime accepts, and the page ends on a pretty funny note that I won't spoil here. A team of Joes is tasked with establishing order among the inhabitants of Unicron's body, led by Joe Colton himself. Guess finding his place didn't take very long. Meanwhile, Hawk is out for a stroll with Carol Lee, the woman he mentioned in narration once at the beginning of Part 1. She's nervous because of the toll merging with the Matrix has on him, worried that she'll be pushed away again, and would feel better if she knew how the future looked. The comic ends as he kisses her, says it looks perfect, and they walk off into the most romantic kind of sunset, one with a planet-sized robot corpse floating in the sky.
That was G.I. Joe versus the Transformers Black Horizon. There were times where this was fun to read. It was nicely paced, and I liked the conclusion enough. But there are a lot of things left out that kept it from being a really good story.
I admit I'm a sucker for Optimus's righteous monologues and laying the smackdown on megalomaniacs, and there are things I'm willing to overlook, like how they didn't show what the Cobra-La foot soldiers look like. Though, considering how the citizens look pretty human already, how much more horrifying can they be? And I'll admit, my predictions turned out wrong, like Hawk being Colton's son, unless that was going to be a revelation in a possible 5th installment. As much of a pain as it was while writing this review, I can even get over how some characters like Pythona don't get named until Part 2, and some like the Atomic Man don't really get named at all, at least not in context. You can't expect everyone to have memorized every 80s character, though it did get irritating when they repeatedly used the underdog faces overwhelming odds shtick without actually showing how they won. First with Eject, then with Colton.
I'm also not going to overlook the fact that we have a character that's been captive for 2.5 decades, likely in or at very least nearing his 50s, and he hasn't got a single gray hair. Oh, they put a scar on his cheek. Yeah, that's a sufficient sign of aging.
Once again, the series tries to set up some kind of emotional or personal arc for various characters, then just forgets about them and decides they're resolved. Hot Rod suggests Prime is worried about losing another comrade like Bumblebee, but it's never addressed, never makes an impact on the story. Abernathy, aka Hawk, is supposed to feel weighed down by his connection to the Matrix, but he doesn't hesitate to help the Autobots stop the sale of their tech. He doesn't talk about what it feels like for him to see a grim future or the alleged millions of other possible futures. He mentions a love interest once, and none of it comes up for the majority of the story. How are we supposed to feel for what he's supposed to be feeling if we only get some expositional narration? Hawk said he feared the future, but he's never shown being fearful very often, or at all. His defiant speech to Globulus would have had more impact if we saw some frequent visions of a devastating future from his perspective throughout the story, occurrences throughout the mission that seem to build up to this apocalyptic destiny. And every so often, something hopeful occurs or is said to contradict it, like finding a war hero thought dead. Maybe show Hawk's hesitation for a certain mission. Then when he defies destiny, it means something. As it is, we're supposed to, I guess, assume that the Matrix affects humans differently from Cybertronians, because Prime never mentions seeing horrible visions of the future.
I liked Joe Colton as a character, though I don't know if he was really done all that much better. It's a good enough excuse that he was performing his duty as a soldier, willingly staying captive to prevent a greater evil plot. But they do kind of yada yada the very real question of what he does with himself in the modern times. It seemed like something that could have had some weight to it, but he's basically just still a soldier, on to the next mission. It's like there was never really any tension to begin with.
Pythona's conscience kind of comes out of left field and wasn't given enough setup. A sort of weird opposite to the setups that didn't stick the landing. And then, oy vey, there's Flint. I really don't know what they were thinking. I mean, previous stories never really do much to help you get to know these characters. Like all the 20 and 30-somethings this was aimed at the time were supposed to mentally fill in those gaps with memories of the old cartoons. Thus, it makes most characters feel like archetypes at best, or stereotypes and tropes at worst. Flint never exactly featured in the other installments, and here he's overall unlikable. So when Lady J starts macking on him, it's just utterly baffling when you look back at their one other scene together. Even for a character from an 80s property, he seems vapid and lacking in personality. With him, it's like they figured it was enough that he spoke in action movie quips and called it a day.
Do you want me to hurt him for you? Because I will.
Whether or not it was intended as the final crossover of its kind by Devil's Due, it made sense to use Unicron. He's probably the biggest bad in Transformers lore, and how some puny fleshlings on Earth managed to keep him at bay was not only fairly believable, but worked well in his ultimate downfall. In that regard, including Joe Colton staying prisoner voluntarily, it was an organic way to use Cobra-La's resources against the Giant. But the strange people's dislike of human machinery for not being alive seems pretty flimsy.
I doubt I'm the only one thinking there's some kind of ethical debate to be had on the implications of relying on living things to be your home, your clothes, and your weaponry. Maybe they're cool with it, but if they've had a bad day or are just in a bad mood, you're naked in your backyard on a cold, cold night because you didn't take your kitchen's feelings into account when you decided dinner was going to be a garlic tuna avocado casserole.
If human technology was the real problem, what stopped Cobra-La from offering their ways as an alternative? If they were concerned for the planet and were shepherding humanity in secret, why not tell Unicron to never come back under threat of spore death and guide humanity to be less destructive? And lest we forget, they apparently engineered Yetis for apparent labor and security, so it's not like they've got the moral high ground here. Plus the whole "look at what man does to the earth" excuse for an evil conspiracy came at the last minute, not unlike a certain other series Seeley wrote for, though at least here it felt more consistent with the villain's motives. I thought the art was more or less good. I didn't really have a problem with it. It's perhaps a bit more stylized than previous installments, and occasionally there may be a weird expression or angle, and sometimes characters just got blotchy in detail if they were far away. That's something I tend to be a bit more forgiving about.
It's not an awful or painful read, but it suffers from a lot of missed opportunities for the kind of deeper storytelling they clearly started going for, then just up and abandoned. Little wonder why I keep thinking they were relying largely on 80s nostalgia to do most of the work for them. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.